Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 6th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, assistant professor at Texas State University, author of The Walls Within, The Politics of Immigration in Modern America, Sarah R. Coleman will be joining us. Meanwhile, Joe Biden moves up the deadline for all adult access to vaccines to mid-April. And a new report shows that at least 40,000 children lost a parent to COVID in this country. Disproportionately black children. Joe Manchin, meanwhile, claims he'll block a 7% increase to the corporate taxes, but he's okay with a 4% increase. First progressive primary challenge of 2022 launches as Nina Turner in Ohio shatters fundraising goals for Q1. We should mention Nina Turner will be on this program tomorrow with a couple other Democratic candidates, progressives. Activists on a hunger strike over the Yemen blockade in Washington, D.C. And in northern Alabama, 1,100 coal miners have gone on strike. The parliamentarian taketh and giveth backeth. Democrats secure a key ruling. They can get bonus reconciliation bills. Major League Baseball moves the All-Star game to Colorado as Republicans threaten corporations over their Georgia voter law protests. Meanwhile, investor calls revealed that major restaurant chains have no issue whatsoever with the minimum wage raise. In fact, it may help them. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, there we go. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am feeling slightly under the weather. I got my second shot yesterday. I'm obviously excited about that, but like a lot of people, having a little bit of an adverse reaction to the second shot. But
some body aches.
Little achy, little tired, but worth it. So happy to have gotten it, and that is. So it is what it is. We should say tomorrow we will have Nina Turner on the program, and Isaiah James. I think we have locked in. And Brendan, who's the third that we have on tomorrow?
Tom Nelson.
Tom Nelson from Wisconsin, running against Ron Johnson in 2022. So we'll be talking to those. We don't have a lot of candidates on this program, but there's some key races and some progressives that we're really interested in. And so that's that. There is one of the things that we've been talking about for several weeks now, Emma, as you know, is that Andrew Cuomo has been racked by multiple scandals.
Yes.
Ranging from covering up the numbers of deaths in nursing homes from COVID. In fact, also, I would say, including the decision to use nursing homes as a means of dealing with the initial COVID surge. We also have multiple reports now, I think 6 or 7 accusations by women of either workplace harassment, sexual harassment, or some other form of sexual harassment that they have in dealing with Andrew Cuomo. And there's a long line of issues with Andrew Cuomo. But what it has done is it apparently seems to have weakened his hand in dealing with lawmakers in this state. And that, from the perspective of people who want New York State to move forward and have some progress, is a good thing. Had a deal the other day. He signed legalization of marijuana, of cannabis in this state. And there is apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, lawmakers are very near a budget deal to raise income and corporate taxes in New York State. States are different than the federal government. They do need taxes to pay for things.
Yes.
States don't have the ability to print money. However, in New York, we've got a lot of very wealthy people. And right now, New York City's top income tax is 3.88%. That will go up by a point on the state tax. So income over $5 million would be taxed at 10.3%. Income over $25 million would be taxed at 10.9%. Please, folks, try and keep yourself together. I know this is painful for people. People are very upset about this. It's sad to hear that.
You talking about taxes or the taxes being raised?
Well, you know, you're making only $5 million a year, and you're
Right.
going to have a slight bump, not even a full percentage point. Taxes would rise from 9.65% from 8.82% for single filers reporting more than $1 million of income and joint filers reporting more than $2 million of income. This is going to have a boon for the state. These individuals, I think, will be able to match.
Yeah, but maybe they'll just have to move to a state that respects their wealthy values, like Florida.
Right.
No
Enjoy
income tax.
it, folks. Exactly.
Yeah. Go party with Matt Gaetz down there.
Indeed. But so this is the dynamic that's happening. But there's another interesting dynamic that's happening that's apropos for our guest today in New York State as part of this. This is a report from CBS 6 in Albany, and Albany being the capital of New York State. Undocumented residents and advocates are calling for financial assistance during COVID. And let's play this clip.
Well, dozens of ralliers marched through the Empire State Plaza concourse this afternoon. They were calling on lawmakers to provide billions of dollars in relief for tax-paying undocumented workers. As CBS 6's Brianna Supardi reports, they say it's money that they're also entitled to.
Yeah, you've been paying rent for me and working so I could eat and have food at the table and so I could have a home to live in.
A young girl's plea to New York State lawmakers as she talks about her father, one of thousands of undocumented workers struggling to make ends meet, excluded from any financial assistance during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dozens of people rallied at the Empire State Plaza concourse today, calling for the state legislature and Governor Cuomo to include $3.5 billion in the state budget for relief for New Yorkers who have been excluded in receiving state and federal aid, including unemployment and rent relief.
They're in dire straits, facing eviction, facing hunger. They are New Yorkers who are struggling, and they deserve the same dignity as every other New Yorker that works in New York State.
And you said they are paying taxes.
They absolutely pay taxes. Undocumented folks pay taxes every single year.
According to the Fiscal Policy Institute, undocumented New Yorkers pay $1.1 billion annually in state and local sales, property, and income taxes.
Because as a legislator, sometimes you make hard decisions, believe me. But this This is not a hard decision.
New York State Senator Jabari Brisport was just one of a handful of lawmakers at the rally calling on his colleagues and the governor to provide this funding in the budget.
We talk about people that have been struggling the past year. These people have been struggling even worse. They haven't gotten anything, and this is a one shot to help them.
I reached out to the governor's office and the offices of Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie and Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins, but have not heard back at this time.
So Cuomo is feeling the heat based on the scandals that you listed. He has agreed to marijuana legalization, ending for the most part, or at least scaling back solitary confinement in jails, doing some progressive priorities based on the personal accusations that he's facing. He should just resign, but I digress. This should be another one where he should be feeling immense heat on this.
It's also lawmakers, and the interesting thing is you hear how this is framed, and this seems like we've heard these type of controversies in the past. In fact, AOC voted against the first CARES Act because it didn't provide anything for undocumented immigrants. The idea that they also have to sell the idea that, like, well, look, there's $1 billion worth of taxes being paid. These people are owed this money, as opposed to the idea of just like, well, they're human beings who live in this state and they need support. They need places to live and to eat. And the idea that this is controversial, that we would provide services for undocumented immigrants in this country, putting even aside the question of whether it's a net economic gain in terms of taxes, is a relatively new phenomenon in this country. Well, relatively new. It has not always been the case. And when we talk to our next guest, she will tell us more about that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Sarah Coleman on her book, The Walls Within, The Politics of Immigration in Modern America. And meanwhile, today's show sponsored in part by Grove. It's grove.co. I think most of us know the importance of using natural products in our homes, right? You don't want cleaners that are going to make your kids sick, your pet sick, you sick. But where do you go for this? Well, I'll tell you where I go. Grove Collaborative. It's the online marketplace that delivers healthy home, beauty, and personal care products directly to you. Grove Collaborative takes all the guesswork out of it. You can go green easily because everything that they offer on their marketplace on the site is healthy for you. You can browse the site for thousands of home, beauty, and personal care products. Like I say, all guaranteed to be good for you, your family, your home, and the planet. You don't have to shop at multiple stores. You don't have to search endlessly online. You don't have to go to some behemoth who has a monopoly and trying to become the marketplace. I'm not going to say their name. You can join over 2 million households who have trusted Grove Collaborative to make their homes a happier and healthier place. Plus, shipping is fast and free on your first order. For me, I actually just placed my most recent Grove order, I don't know, like less than a week ago. I am big into the Grove Collaborative. They have a concentrated orange sort of all-purpose cleaner. People know I'm a little sensitive to smell. This is one that I can use. I've used some of their Mrs. Meyer's cleaner products on there.
Great product.
Yes. They have a new pine scent, which is also
Your
Seder approved.
Oh, there you go.
Yes. I just can't do any like flowery stuff. And that's why I also get all my 7th generation unscented dish and hand soap from the Grove Collaborative. I already have told the story in the past of that was my go-to for getting TP during the early days of COVID. Mm-hmm. You will not, believe me, you will enjoy this site quite a bit. Making the switch to natural products, it's never been easier. For a limited time, When our listeners go to grove.co/majority, you're going to get to choose a free gift with your first order of $30 or more. But you have to use our special code. Go to grove.co/majority to get your exclusive offer. That's grove.co/majority. Check it out. Meanwhile, for a long time, I don't think I'm telling any secrets. I was against using any deodorant because I was afraid of the junk that's in it, and I didn't want it goes on top of your body, and then it seeps into your body.
Yeah.
Well, I have settled that problem between the sort of the battle between, like, you don't want to stink, but you also don't want to be putting, like, I don't know, are they heavy metals or whatever, like aluminum and stuff like that? Yeah. I don't know. I just didn't want any of that stuff. But I switched to Native at nativedeo.com. Switching to Native from an antiperspirant doesn't mean you have to worry about BO happening at any point during the day. Native deodorant is made with ingredients you've heard of, like coconut oil, shea butter. It is formulated, like I said, without aluminum, without parabens or talc, and it really works. There's a reason why Native has over 16,000 5-star reviews. They have 10 cents, 10 smells. 10 cents. But yeah, 10 cents.
This is confusing.
They have coconut and vanilla. They have lavender and rose. Of course, I can't even go anywhere near the lavender and rose.
Yeah, but that one
coconut and
sounds
vanilla.
nice to me.
Yeah, I know. I'm not making a general statement about the lavender. For me, can't happen.
I'm making a pro lavender and rose statement.
Feel free. Just you got to be careful about wearing it in the studio.
Okay.
They also have rotating seasonals. They have a new limited edition collection with Jungalow features, scents like tangerine and citrus blossom, that I could do. Sandalwood and fig, could not do. They also offer my favorite, which is
unscented.
The unscented option. And they have a sensitive collection made without baking soda and a line of plastic-free deodorants in their most popular scents. Native offers free shipping on every order in the U.S. They have 30-day free returns and exchanges in the U.S. It was, I tried it, never went back. Well, no, I went back. I just never stopped using it. The unscented has been doing very well by me. Native DO. You can make the switch today to Native today by going to nativedeo.com/majority report, or you can use the promo code majority report at checkout. You get 20% off your first order. That's nativedeo.com/majority report, or use the promo code majority report at checkout for 20% off your first order. And lastly, if you are like me, spent the better part of your life just thinking a sock is a sock is a sock, well, I have some shocking news for you. Socks are the thing, the first line of defense between you and the foundation of our body. That is our feet. They are literally the most active ingredient in footwear. And Features is obsessed with making the perfect sock. Ones that don't slip, ones that don't bunch. They don't give you blisters. You can support your feet with the anatomical design and targeted compression of Features. And targeted compression acts like a hug around the arch of your foot. It keeps the sock in place. The anatomical design conforms to the left and right shape of your feet, creating a custom-like fit that keeps the sock in place so you can focus on whatever you're doing. Your workout, you're running, you're walking, you're golfing.
There's
they literally
so many nerve endings in your feet. You just have to keep them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's
Left
why foot
and
massages
right
are so good.
The socks have literally are labeled left and right. And the great thing about these things, if you're unsatisfied at any point, you can get a replacement pair, no questions asked. The socks keep your feet cool. They keep your feet dry and comfortable. When I told Brendan, I said that Features wanted to advertise on the show, I was like, I've never heard of these socks. Are they special? And Brendan almost jumped out of his seat. Brendan, you wear these for jogging, or do you wear them just in general?
I wear them mostly for active wear. When I'm working out or something like that, it gives like a nice compression to your foot. And, I remember when I got them at the store, the running store, they were like, "You don't wear these socks?" And I was like, "No." But then I tried them and they're amazing. I jumped out of my socks.
You really honestly did. He was very excited about it. For me, active wear really basically constitutes just moving around. That's basically what my threshold for active wear is.
Well, you walk a lot.
I walk a lot. Features are challenging you to try a pair, and if they're not the best socks you've ever worn, on or off the golf course or your jogging track, they'll take them back. They're so confident you're going to love their socks. They've also given listeners of the Majority Report $10 off your first pair of Features when you go to features.com/majority. That's Features, FEETURES.com/majority for $10 off your first pair of Features. Okay, and don't forget we have the coupon codes for all that stuff, and the links will be in the YouTube description and in the podcast description. So check that out. And now I'd like to welcome to the show Sarah Coleman. She is an assistant professor at at Texas State University, author of The Walls Within: The Politics of Immigration in Modern America. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Sam, thanks so much for having me.
And Emma is here with me as well. We just played a clip of activists who were headed to the New York State Capitol to talk to lawmakers about getting COVID relief for folks who are undocumented or unauthorized who have been working in New York State, providing tax dollars. And it really, one of the things that I found fascinating about your book was I am used to, because as an adult for most of my life, the idea of unauthorized, undocumented immigrants getting any type of services from the U.S. government has been a very contentious, controversial issue. But that was not always the case. Give us a little bit of a history of unauthorized immigrants in this country, going back to the early part, I guess, really the late 1800s.
So I think most listeners would be surprised by this fact, which is between 1935 and 1971, no federal laws barred non-citizens, right? Even unauthorized immigrants from Social Security benefits, things like unemployment insurance or ADC, which later becomes aids to family with dependent children, right? And as new programs are created in the 60s, like Medicaid or the food stamp program, the same rules are applied, right? So basically until the 1970s, under federal law, both authorized and unauthorized immigrants are eligible for these programs on the same basis as citizens. Right. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is sort of that access to these programs has been chipped away and sort of removed piecemeal by piecemeal. First in the 1970s, right, we start to see an attack on unauthorized immigrants' access to these programs. And it's sort of this rise of a new wave of anti-immigrant sentiment in the 1970s really focuses on unauthorized immigrants' access to what we would think of as sort of the social safety net that, the COVID relief bill is part of that. I
want to catch up with that because you have basically four areas where their rights have been chipped away. But before we get that, let's go back to just give us a brief history so that we have a context for this.
Yeah.
In terms of the different moments in our history where there has been a shift or at least a specific disposition towards immigrants in this country, and particularly unauthorized ones.
Okay. So you see a couple big moments, one beginning in the 1880s that targets initially Asian immigration on the West Coast. That's the first sort of big moment of federal intervention. Before that moment, there's going to be a lot of local and sort of state, sort of more community-based movements against immigrants. But the big federal push first comes against Asian immigration on the West Coast in the 1880s. The next sort of big moment.
Sorry, what was behind that though? Why did the federal government decide in the 1880s that we're going to get involved in this?
So you start to see California making, you have, right, the rise of the gold rush, you have the railroad development in the West, you see a huge sort of influx of Chinese immigration on the West Coast that is going to lead California to try and make steps to regulate immigration. And the federal government steps in and says, you know what, you're making a decision that has foreign policy implications. So we don't want you, the state of California, sort of driving policy. And so the federal government sort of steps in at this moment, and it starts to legislate in a new way.
And what drove that, though? Was that the fact that these Asian immigrants were working on the railroads and essentially there was anxiety about job loss? Was that kind of what pushed it forward?
There's anxiety about job loss. There's racism at the heart of it. Obviously, there's a huge sort of concern at this moment, sort of this nativist sentiment that, that Asian immigrants were sort of going to sort of in some way take over the United States. Sort of the same rhetoric that we hear nowadays, sort of about sort of the undocumented population, is sort of what you would have heard in the 1880s in California. Sort of much of the same rhetoric, right? They're going to take over our country. It's a wave. They're a threat to the Anglo-Saxon race at the time. Sort of that kind of language is what you would have heard at the time.
What was there any pushback from the sort of the corporate or capitalist class insofar as like we frankly need this labor and it's cheaper or something to that effect?
Right, and throughout sort of you're going to have this tension that's present throughout history, right, between those who need, like agribusiness, right, is going to be present, or at the time the railroads or various other sort of groups are going to be present. So in the 1880s, you're going to have that presence. In the 1920s and 24, which is sort of, once you move past this question of Asian immigration in the 1880s and you move to the 20s, and this huge rise in anti-immigrant sentiment comes again, there's going to be huge exemptions from the 1920s laws, which we can talk about, but the 1920s laws are going to have huge exemptions for the Western Hemisphere. Why is that? It's because agribusiness wants continued access to Mexican labor. Right. So the next moment we see of huge anti-immigrant sentiment is in the 20s. We're going to see again this anti-immigrant sentiment in the 70s. Right. The people who are going to push for restriction are going to push for something called employer sanctions, which is a category of restrictions that penalize people for hiring undocumented workers. Right. Who's going to push back against that? It's again going to be sort of corporate agribusiness. You're going to see that again, sort of a key part of Reagan's base, actually.
All right, so let's go. So let's take that in the 1920s. Like, what gave rise to it in the 20s, as opposed to, I don't know, the the early aughts of the 20th century?
So what happens in the 1920s is you have this. You've seen a huge shift in the immigration pattern. From generally before that, it was Northern and Western European, right? And you start to see the rise of Southern and Eastern European immigrants, right? We see Jews, we see Italians, we see Slavic people, right? So people from sort of that part of the world. And that sort of shift in immigration pattern happens. At the same time, you have sort of the anti-immigrant sentiment of World War I sort of comes together. Plus you have the rise at the same time of this pseudoscientific racism known as eugenics. And so this sort of swirling comes together at this moment, sort of in the late sort of 1917, 1918, 1920, and it sort of comes together. And that's when you start to see new federal restrictions again. Sort of, it's not as much a question, and Asians will be impacted by the 1924 Act, but it's sort of more based on this concern with rising immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe.
How much of the so-called Spanish flu influenced that? I mean, I guess I'm a little more sensitive to that question because of frankly, what we've seen happen with Asian American, broadly speaking, Asian racism in the context of this pandemic.
Right. So I think there's not as much that you would think about as the Spanish flu per se, but right, there's this idea that immigrants are quote unquote unclean. Right. And sort of that sort of idea that because of eugenics, certain populations are predisposed to disease, or that they're going to be the ones bringing it. Right. So that's sort of more of the general theory role that, like, health. Right. This is a moment where Americans are obsessed with science and health, things like vitamins and all this sort of moment, and it's feeding into this anti-immigrant sentiment, sort of in a more, the idea that like, people are bringing diseases across the border. You see this particularly in the Southwest. You're going to see sort of a lot of the Southwest border will have like cleansing stations at the border point where people will sort of have to go through these horrific treatments because they're bringing, to make sure they're not bringing diseases into the United States.
Interesting. All right. Well, so let's jump up into, I guess the really the sort of the more modern era that you focus on, and that really starts, I guess, in 1965 with the passage of the Hart-Celler. Is it am I pronouncing it right?
Hart-Celler. It's named after Emanuel Celler.
Okay, Hart-Celler Act, which was also known as the Immigrant and Nationality Act. What was the impetus for that? What did it do?
Okay, so the 1965 Act is an incredibly important moment. And what it does is it undoes in 1924, right? I talked about that earlier moment of anti-immigrant sentiment. They had put in place race-based quotas for immigration to the United States. They had basically ruled that anyone from Asia was ineligible to citizenship. What's really important about 1965 is it undoes all of these sort of the quota system of the 1920s, and it launches a new era in immigration. And so why at that moment, right? That's what you asked. A couple things are going on, right? What else is going on if you think in your head in 1965?
Right, with civil rights.
Civil rights, right? So you have the Civil Rights Act. It comes at this moment, right? It's a year after the Civil Rights Act. It's the same moment of the Voting Rights Act. It's sort of a piece of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And sort of in an effort to sort of promote civil rights and the idea of uniformity, it sets a uniform cap on all nations and gets rid of sort of the very strict national origins, race-based quota system of the 1920s. It also comes right at the moment, right? The US is involved in the Cold War. You're trying to appeal to the hearts and minds of people in all of these countries around the world going through decolonization. What does it say to them if you're like, by the way, you can't come in, right? Please join our side in the fight against communism. But by the way, you're not allowed to immigrate to our country, right? So it's sort of this moment of Cold War politics meets civil rights politics in the United States, and we start a new system. But in an effort to make everything uniform, it also introduces, and this is an important sort of, we always think of it as a very positive act that sort of is this incredibly fair system. And what it does is for the first time, it creates a cap on the Western Hemisphere, right? So while the overall cap is going to rise, for the first time, the volume of legal immigration from Mexico actually falls.
Okay, so I mean, just to be clear on that, and first off, and I think there's also, there's a decent amount of I think of thought that the success of the civil rights movement in some part was also tied to the Cold War. I mean,
Sure.
that was also part of the incentive structure to pass these things. But when you say a broad cap and when you say a Western cap, like, does that mean that each year, instead of we're letting in 10,000 people from this country and 5,000 people from that country and 3,000 from that country and 20,000 from a different country, we're letting in 500,000 period, or was it in regions? I mean, because it seems to like create this competition. There's competition between countries or nations of origin that didn't exist when we had it. I'm not proposing that.
Like, you want to go back to the 20s?
I mean, that seems to be a part of the implication. Yes, is that it pits different nationalities against each other on some level.
So it sets a uniform cap of about 20,000 on all nations, right? Without taking into account, right? So this idea that we all need to be equal without taking into account the size of the population of the country, for example,
right, okay.
Or sort of any sort of relationship, right, with Mexico that we've had, So up until this point, Mexico hadn't been, immigration from Mexico had been regulated, right? You had to have visas, you had to that sort of thing, but there was no cap. And so for the first time, we're going to see a sharp increase in the number of deportations because a lot of the population flow that had been going on is now suddenly capped under this new cap. that at Mexico, as I mentioned, agribusiness had always been pushing for a Mexico sort of exemption in the 20s. And that exemption is no longer exists after 60.
How conscious were, I mean, I understand the idea that the impetus was like, we don't want to be seen as playing favorites here, but surely someone must have realized like, we're going to impose this cap, but it's really going to end up falling. It's going to hurt a specific set of countries, and one of them is going to be Mexico.
Right. And so I think the cap, is sort of the Western Hemispheric cap is a last minute addition to the bill, sort of relatively. The big push behind the bill, right, originally, the people who are the main proponents of the bill are sort of the second generation of Southern and Eastern Europeans in the United States, right, who are, by this point, hold a large electoral power, right, particularly in the urban Northeast, right? These are Italians, these are Jewish immigrants, right? And they're saying, how come we're still part of this second tier? Why are in this, if we're having a conversation about equality, how come we're not allowed to bring, we don't have sort of access to the same equal platform? And so that's sort of who the big push is from. I think the bill has a lot of unintended consequences, right? And I think sort of what we've seen in terms of the impact on migration from Mexico, right, is one of the unintended consequences.
And so this is when basically deportations start going up at this point.
At a rapid rate, yes.
And when does you say 1971, what was the time where we start to see this proliferation of assaults on what you call 4 areas, I guess. I don't know if you call it 4 areas, but 4 areas of civil rights, I guess. Outline what those 4 areas are and why does it happen within this period of time?
So the 4 areas that I talk about are education, labor rights, access to the social safety net, and sort of civil liberties. And so why does it happen at this moment? Because what the Hart-Celler Act does, right, is it's actually going to dramatically reshape the demographic profile of the United States, right? So we get rid of the national origins and we prioritize both skills and family reunification. And this is this moment we're going to see a huge rise in Asian immigration and from the Western Hemisphere, from like South and Central America and Mexico. And so what it does is it sort of leads to a huge debate in American society at this moment. This is sort of what I look at over the place of immigrants in the United States. So when the racial profile of immigrants changes, right, it sort of changes what people start to think immigrants are entitled to, right? So put another way, as controlling admissions to the Southwest border becomes very difficult, right? The battle to control immigrants sort of shifts to these interior areas and their access to the state and society, right? Part of why I wrote this book, and I think giving you some numbers might help, is, there are 24 million people who live in the United States today, right, who are immigrants with non-citizenship status, right? That's both undocumented and those with both temporary and permanent legal residency status, right? So you have 24 million people in the United States today. So part of the conversation sure is about the border, right? But what people increasingly do beginning in the 70s is they realize this conversation also takes place inside the country. And if you want, what they sort of anti-immigrant activists start to do is they start to attack the place of immigrants in the United States.
Is that relative to kind of their contribution to the government? Like, how does the whole taxpayer conversation, which has been so central to we've done other interviews, to political discourse since really, the 19th century about who gets to make decisions, who gets to access benefits from the state. How central was that to what was being discussed in the 70s and then I guess obviously into the Reagan presidency in the 80s?
Yeah. So I think it's very essential. So again, this is a post-civil rights moment. So a lot of the nativist rhetoric that anti-immigrant activists used sort of in the early 20th century, right, becomes no longer publicly socially acceptable. And sort of what the new anti-immigrant sentiment does is they sort of begin challenging, sort of make a twofold argument, right? They basically argue that immigrants are not only taking our jobs, quote unquote, they're also taking our benefits and access to the state at this moment, right? That the US, that many people are seeing that social safety net and sort of jobs disappear, right? We have a lot going on. We have deindustrialization, right? We have the rise of service industry. A lot of Americans at this moment are really sort of facing a new economic reality. And sort of the anti-immigrant sentiment at this time really capitalizes on that. And they say, you're a threat. Not only are you taking our jobs, which are moving overseas or they're lost, right? They are also sort of taking away this social safety net, and you're a drain on our system.
And so so we have this sort of like, I don't know, I guess this societal dispositional shift on looking at one was like an action, right? Like you're crossing the border illegally or, you know, without authorization. And then the other becomes like you are now labeled as a state of being. And that allows this conversation to move internally. And it's not just, this is sort of trans ideological at that point too, right? I mean, there's those on the left, in the labor movement, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Cesar Chavez, I think, was very undocumented immigrant. I mean, you just talk about those different forces that were sort of like congealed or I guess, at that time to sort of like develop this new phenomena, I guess, of an illegal alien, I think they say at that point.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's really important to keep in mind today when so many people think of this as sort of Republican versus Democrat. It wasn't that way in the moment, right? In the 60s and 70s and much throughout the 80s. And so at the moment, right, those who are pushing immigration restriction in the 70s, on the left, you have, as you mentioned, UFW, Chavez, the AFL-CIO, the National Urban League, right? They see these as challenges. This is a population that they view as challenging the domestic labor force, right? And so they're sort of unhappy with, and they're going to push for employer sanctions. They're going to come together with sort of an unusual alliance with people who have left the environmental movement, who are very concerned with population control, right? This is the moment right after that book, The Population Bomb's been published, right? There's sort of that. So also coming from the left, you have the labor unions, right? You have also this sort of people who are particularly concerned with population growth. They're going to come together with sort of more traditional restrictionists on sort of, you know, that you think like nativists at this moment are sort of going to come together. On the side opposing restriction, right? You're going to have sort of those who are committed to an expansive notion of human rights, sort of that wing of the Democratic Party, sort of more of the civil rights aspect of the Democratic Party. You're also going to have, right, much of the Republican Party that opposes regulation, right? That supports deregulation, that supports continued agribusiness. Sort of those people are not going to support things like employer sanctions. So you have this sort of, the parties are made up of what political scientist Dan Tishner calls strange bedfellows, right? So it's sort of these odd combinations in the 1970s that are really going to sort of bang heads over this question of undocumented immigration.
And then you write about the civil rights movement and start to engage legally in this fight as the fight moves to, I guess, to the interior of the country, places like Iowa. Talk about that development.
Right. So the civil rights movement provides a lot of legacy for the immigrants' rights movement, right? And so what you have coming out in the 1970s is immigrants' rights activists are trying to figure out the best way to respond to this attack on immigrants' rights. And what they do is they turn to sort of the model of the African-American freedom struggle. And they found groups like the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund. They employ strategies of, you know, using the 14th Amendment, equal protection. And they start to begin a legal battle over these efforts to restrict immigrants' access to state and society. One of the ones that I talk about takes place in Tyler, Texas. It's a 1982 Supreme Court case, Plyler v. Doe. It starts in Texas in the 70s, but it makes it to the Supreme Court in 82. And it's the reason why in the United States today, K through 12 education is not dependent on immigration status, right? It basically says that if you're under the age of 18, you have access to education on the same level. And the reason this case rises is Texas starts to charge out certain school districts in Texas start to charge $1,000 per student to undocumented students. And these lawyers come in and take up the case and bring it to the Supreme Court.
And that $1,000 is like something like close to like $6,000 today.
Yeah, it's somewhere. Yeah, it's somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. Incredibly cost prohibitive, right? And these civil rights lawyers in California are looking for a case to challenge this, and just sort of in the model of Brown v. Board of Ed, right? They look at undocumented children as the best vessel by which to challenge, right? This population of students is the best sort of to begin their assault, their sort of challenge to this assault, because they think they're sort of the most promising, and they are successful.
And what and give us a sense of what the basis of that ruling was. That despite the fact that they're not citizens, and you know, again, like you say, for 40 years, some odd 40 years, this was uncontroversial, and we don't really talk about it prior to 1935 so much because it wasn't necessarily a huge federal support system per se, and just to remind people that when the Constitution was written, you know, like, I mean, this came up in the census count, right? Like, we're not counting citizens, we're counting people who are residing within the country. And we have this concept of, taxation, no taxation without representation, which essentially means like no taxation without getting any benefits of representative government. But what was the theory in the ruling that found Texas has to provide K through 12?
So it's a 5-4 decision. And Justice Brennan famously writes at the end, he says something like, it's difficult to understand what the state of Texas hopes to do by creating, quote, a subclass of illiterates within our boundaries, right? He's like, and it sort of makes this very strong statement, right? What is the benefit to the state at large? The other part that's about it, right, is that, the case is sort of a moment where they say, an argument that we now see about DACA, right? It's sort of, how do you blame these children for the actions of their parents, right? These are children who are in the United States, right? They've been here. And in fact, the test case that they bring, almost all of the families are families where the children are of mixed status, right? So some children have been born in the United States and some children in that family have been born in Mexico. And so the question is, how are you going to start charging the same family $5,000 and one child goes to free based on this sort of obscure notion of sort of when were they born here versus there? These are people who have been longtime residents of this community, and it doesn't make sense, right? There's no benefit to the state by creating this sort of second class of citizenship.
That Brennan would make that argument about that there is no state, and I mean that in terms of the country, no state interest in creating this subclass. I mean, ends up being sort of the same, at least contours of the argument as to why you want to provide unauthorized immigrants licenses and prevent local authorities from creating agreements to deport them if they function as citizens, because you don't want there to be this tier of citizens that are walking around who don't want to report, a fire or a crime or, any type of problem or driving around and not have insurance, et cetera, et cetera.
Completely. And it's an argument that we now see today among much of the law enforcement community, right? Who does not want local immigration enforcement powers, right? They're like, our job is to fight crime, and if people are underreporting, that does not help us do our jobs. Right? That's a strong argument made by most of local law enforcement against sort of these efforts to try and bring immigration to local law enforcement.
Okay, so let's talk about Urca, and I really want to get to the dynamic between what happens in California and Bill Clinton. I think is really fascinating too, and I want to get to that. But let's just briefly talk about Urca, which takes place during the Reagan years, and for a while it was, people would refer to like Reagan gave amnesty to millions of unauthorized immigrants. But tell us what Urca was.
So Urca is the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, which is quite a mouthful. But it's basically a result of about a decade of fighting on both sides between those sort of the anti-immigrant push of the 70s and those who are opposed to it. And so what happens is Urca creates, a pathway to citizenship for 3 million people. It also puts in place for the first time employer sanctions. So the idea is that people who employ unauthorized immigrants are going to be penalized for that, which can lead to, right, a lot of discrimination in hiring, right? Because people that's sort of the negative, sort of one of the underbellies of that. It is a moment which for restrictionists, they see Urca as this moment where they've won. They've finally gotten these employer sanctions at the federal level. It turns out, right, they're going to be heavily disappointed because Reagan, right, is torn between the wings of his party, and he, in sort of the final negotiations, strips all enforcement mechanisms from the bill. So he basically says, sure, we can have employer sanctions on the books, but I'm going to restrict every effort at sort of enforcing it. And so it becomes this moment where I think a lot of anti-immigrant activism sort of had put a lot of faith in the federal government and sort of really pushed for restriction and felt like, okay, this is our moment. And then they get incredibly disappointed by the Urca bill because of the way in which it creates a pathway to citizenship, and they sort of lost faith in employer sanctions.
And that failure of the federal government, and particularly Californian Ronald Reagan, for really having a teeth on this bill to punish employers, leads to a movement in California, an anti-immigration movement that leads ultimately to California Prop 187. Yeah, talk about this, because this era of California has come up multiple times in various, so many things that have come out of California end up spreading across the country. It's fascinating, the implications of what happens in California. And people should remember, at this time, California is not a blue state. Yeah. It is at best like a purple state, if that even, right?
Yeah, Bill Clinton had won the state in 1992 for the first time in like almost 30 years, I think. I can't remember exactly, right? He wins it with 46% of the vote, right? Ross Perot had 20%. So it is in no way a solid blue state, right? We don't, I teach college students. I'm always like, California was a swing state in 1992. They're like, what? How could that be? But that's this moment, right? So California is definitely a swing state. He wins it, and he's sort of stuck in this moment. And what we start to see in the early 90s is that California starts to really have a big push in its grassroots anti-immigrant sort of movement. And they begin pushing something, the sort of grassroots in California begin pushing something called Prop 187, which is a ballot initiative that is going to remove access to basically all benefits for undocumented immigrants, and including, small, tiny carve-outs for like emergency healthcare, but basically education, social safety net programs, all of this thing. It's highly contested. It's on the 94 ballot, and it wins. It wins quite successfully. It wins by a sort of very large margin. It is going to eventually be invalidated by the federal courts as unconstitutional. But sort of what's interesting to me is it sort of pushes a huge push of the anti-immigrant sentiment at the federal level, right? And part of when you think about why California, that's interesting to me, right? Urca, all these anti-immigrant activists had put all this faith in the federal government, and now they've just been let down, right? They're like, we've been totally let down by the federal government. We're going to push at the state level. And they realize that that's sort of where a lot of these battles are going to go on, and that they can, by putting pressure at the state level, they can actually influence the federal level.
I want to talk about how Bill Clinton reacted to this, but I also, my experience, and I was out in California a decent amount starting in the mid 90s. And for me, what really resonated out there, and this is where Rush Limbaugh got his start, in that state in 1988. At least in doing right-wing talk radio. And right-wing talk radio was huge out there. And, you look at 2005 and the attempt by the Bush administration to push forward some type of immigration reform. There was massive pushback from the, I guess the grassroots of the Republican Party. But so much of it was driven by talk radio. I wonder if that plays in a factor in California. And people got to remember, too, like, of all places, California is most susceptible to talk radio because you're in your car so much of the day. I mean, that sounds sort of ludicrous, but you got a huge swath of the population are captured audience for half an hour in the morning and a half an hour at night at least. And there's only right wingers on the radio, basically pounding away, and that's you get the recall of Gray Davis that follows a couple years later. Pete Wilson is of the day. How much do you have a sense of how much that plays into what happened in California?
Right. I think the media played a huge role. And it has played a huge role beginning in the 70s, but in particularly in California, right? A lot of the initial movement against Prop 187 was sort of to ignore it, which didn't end up working, right? Activists in the beginning sort of were like, we don't want to draw attention to this ballot initiative because they'll just sort of like make more flames and where there's, more smoke and then they'll realize there's fire. So I think what you start to see though, is that a lot of these people write in, I study some of these activists, right? They're sort of on local radio. They're talking on, writing letters to the editor in their local newspapers, right? They're sort of fanning the flames with this rhetoric. And people like Pete Wilson are, right, running ads that say America's treasure without measure, right? And there's sort of these videos that they're streaming of like clips of immigrants, quote unquote, running across the border at various border points. They're sort of, the media is playing a huge role in sort of creating this, I hate to say this at this current moment, right? This crisis mentality, right? That there's this crisis in California in 1994. And that's what the state is going through a major economic depression in the early 90s. Unemployment is skyrocketing. And Wilson turns to that, an easy scapegoat for him, which is immigrants at that moment, with sort of the help of the media.
And then Bill Clinton, in anticipation of his 96 reelection, how does that impact him when he looks at California, what's going on in California?
So, Bill Clinton does not really want to deal with immigration, right? He doesn't run on it in 92. It's like not something that he's particularly interested in, but California makes him have to deal with it, right? And it puts it on the map. And he starts to see, and sort of one of the things I uncover in this book is some of these White House memos about, they're starting to realize that there's a huge pressure in California about immigration. And that even if the White House doesn't want to deal with it, they're going to have to deal with it. One of the people says something like, we're taking gratuitous hits on immigration and we need to sort of turn the game around. And so the Clinton White House, after the 94 midterms, sees what happens in California and pivots sharply right? And they unleash a whole new PR campaign around immigration, sort of pushing enforcement. And then the other big thing that they do is, right, this is all about, 187 is about access to the social safety net. The White House is working on welfare reform. Right. And so you have these two sort of side-by-side those come together. And what the Clinton White House realizes is that this effort to remove, House Republicans have sort of started to push, as part of welfare reform, removing immigrants from legally authorized residents. So those who are without citizenship status, like LPR, like green card holders, has started to House Republicans have started to push it. And the Clinton campaign looks at California and says, we kind of need to go with this, right? We have to we need to take this harder line and we need to incorporate it. And what they realize is that it's sort of mutually beneficial, because they end up financing 40% of their welfare reform plan by removing benefits from legal permanent residents and other non-citizen immigrants.
Just one of many examples of the Clinton triangulation that really, in many respects, we're still living with that legacy, although theoretically it's being tried to be thrown off. All right, so let me ask you this, because you did mention the crisis, and we only got a couple of minutes left here. Throughout these series, historically, of these changes, has that in any way, I mean, because the argument that we're hearing now is because Joe Biden came in, Donald Trump was hostile to immigrants. Joe Biden, has not proclaimed such hostility, that this is driving people across the border. And I'm sure there are some people who will say that or have it impacts their expectations. But has throughout this, all of these differences in policies and different dispositions about how we treat immigrants in this country, has that fundamentally changed the rate of immigrants wanting to come to this country versus the things that's driving them out of their own countries?
Right. The majority, right, the access to the social safety net is not the reason why people are coming to the United States, right? It's sort of a false narrative, right? It's the same idea, the same false narrative that, immigrants are taking jobs away from native born Americans. What's influencing why people are crossing is sort of right now, right, is the conditions in the Northern Triangle countries. If you want to talk about sort of the massive poverty that we see, the crime, the corruption, a much harder conversation to have. And so I think it's a lot easier, right? If you're looking sort of to make a quick hit on immigration, like Senator Cruz was on like the boat on the border last week, right? It's easier to say, he tweeted about two things. One, he's on the boat on the border with his machine guns. And the second thing, he's making a false claim that every undocumented immigrant in the United States is going to get a $1,400 COVID check, right? That's an easy sort of argument or easier hit to make. The reality is that's not why people are leaving the countries that they're leaving and coming to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally unable to get that check, and also I'm pretty sure they'd go to other nations if they wanted a broader social safety net than the one that we provide.
That's a good point.
We don't have
exactly. All right. Well, it's a fascinating story, an important one. Sarah Coleman. The book is The Walls Within: The Politics of Immigration in Modern America. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. All right, folks, just wrapping up here. I just can't get over how things changed from that era in terms of it now being so controversial to provide services to people who are in this country, and it is to the benefit of all of us to provide everyone who's here with services that they need. And there is so much data to support. Yeah, occasionally you hear anecdotes about someone crossing the border and saying, Joe Biden's a nice guy, Donald Trump was a jerk, that's why I'm here. But the data shows that in terms of like patterns of immigration, that people come here as a function of what's going on in their countries, not what's going on in this country. And that is what drives immigration here. I think that's just fascinating. And what was also interesting is that following, and we didn't get to this, but following Reagan's Urca, you started to have migration within the country of recent immigrants. And you saw a rush for folks to get naturalized. And so you start to get places like Iowa and Georgia start becoming important places that immigrants are living, which is, I don't know, it's fascinating. Speaking of Georgia, we're going to be talking to Nabila Islam. She is a former congressional candidate and political activist in the fun half today about what's going on in Georgia. But I think that's our time for today. Emma, we'll be back tomorrow, correct?
Yes, we will be back tomorrow.
All right. I just wanted to double check.
I don't know why you need to check with me.
I wanted to check on
it's
that.
Your show.
All right, folks. We will see you tomorrow. And for those of you who are sticking around,
my stomach just growled so hard I was afraid the mic picked it up.
No,
Did you hear it?
I did not hear that.
It was a doozy.
I am still. I'm suffering from a little bit of soreness from the shot. I wanted to read this email.
Oh my goodness.
Listener email, and then we'll go to the fun half.
You teased this before.
I did.
And then you said you're going to wait to read it on air. Okay.
I want to read it, and then we'll go into the fun half. This is from listener Rick. And the subject was Emma is better. And I was like, that's, that's, my presumption was this guy, had an issue with you and thought that somehow you got better or something. And, and Rick writes, "Hi, I listened to the Majority Report show all last week, and I must say, Emma is far better than Sam at this."
Oh, no.
Yep. I really wish you could just let her do all the talking and maybe save Sam for specific topics where he is well prepared. Emma is concise, clear, highly persuasive, and stays on topic. She is clearly highly intelligent, and the show was very awesome, far better than usual while she hosted it. Emma is highly prepared and uses her time effectively. Thanks. Signed, Rick. And, I was like, that was... I was both like very happy that somebody was happy. And I always felt like, you don't, like, you could write in and say, let me just for listeners, this is not a bad email to send, except, but let me just like you write in like, "Hey, Sam, wanted to compliment you because, bringing Emma on the show was a really smart move. In fact, I have to say, I like you, but Emma is better." That's the way you do that.
Right.
Or you don't say Emma is far better.
Right.
But you say it like tentatively. Like, I think Emma might actually be better than Sam. Like, you don't have to rub my face in it.
Yeah,
is my point.
It was incredibly declarative. And I don't think that is a true statement. Everything I've learned about running this show is from watching you run this show. So, but you don't have to say that. I think that's perfectly fine for someone to have that opinion. I'm just saying, like, you ease somebody into it. Yeah.
You don't come like so hard. You could say like, Sam, it's just different people like different things, and I just happen to think she's better. You can temper it just a little bit. Make it a little bit easier for
Don't
me.
temper it. I want, I want to hear about how I'm better looking than Sam.
Brutal.
Maybe not that. Yeah. Or just.
With that said, for Emma's sake, don't forget you can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajority.report.com.
I mean, it's only a matter of time until I seize the means of production and get all of your membership money myself.
I will just come on to do the membership appeal. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you get the free half free of commercials, and then you get the fun half on top of that. So check that out. Nomi is on vacation, so she will not be joining us today, but Nabila Islam will be joining us in the fun half in just a moment. Matt, what's happening in the Leckian media universe?
Nathan Bernard, we're going to talk about this union buster, a progressive union buster story he has. The nurses union, or the nurses up in Maine are trying to form a union, and he's going to tell us a story about a progressive union buster, and we'll have some other stuff too. So that's this Thursday. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel, Left Reckoning YouTube.
Yes, like the stream too on this stream.
Oh yes, like the stream. That would be very helpful. All right. Don't forget, also, check out the Antifada. They're over on Patreon, patreon.com/the Antifada. And we will see you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Okay, we're back. Fun half. Want to let's welcome Nabila onto the show. Nabila Islam. She is a former Georgian congressional candidate and currently a political activist. Do we have her? She's come. Here she is. Hi, Nabila. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us. Emma is joining us in just a second. I think the last time we talked, you were running for office.
I was running for office, yes, and I think we talked another time during the I think the day of the Senate runoff election in Georgia as well.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about.
Hello.
There's
I
there's Emma. She's here now.
I had to eat cashews and
She had to eat cashews, and then we can't eat nuts during the show because then it all gets stuck in the throats and people have problems.
Yeah.
So, all right, so Nabil, ignore that. Give us a sense of what's happening in Georgia right now, because it has become the sort of the epicenter. Now, Georgia is not the only state in the country that's passing these sort of really restrictive voting laws, but it is becoming a major pivot point for a bunch of different things that are happening, from McConnell on one hand, attacking corporations that are trying to, I guess, show that they're on the right side of this argument, to, the both siderism that we're seeing, data journalists in the New York Times saying it doesn't really make a difference. I mean, just give us a sense of what's happening from a perspective from Georgia.
Yes, so our voting rights are under attack, and this new law absolutely will affect voter turnout and how it does make it harder for people to vote, most definitely. It was built on a lie of voter fraud by Donald Trump. So you have, about 60%, over 60% of Republican voters still think that the election was rigged in the presidential. And so they are angry at these local Republican politicians for not doing enough to prevent Joe Biden from winning the state of Georgia. And again, we saw what happened in the Senate runoff. They come out and vote because they were pissed off. So now what Republicans did was they passed some red meat legislation to appease a bunch of these really far-right voters that are going to come out in these primaries that are coming up next year to make them feel better. Like, look, guys, we passed some type of legislation. What it does is it makes it harder for Black and brown and working people to be able to vote. It now includes a voter ID requirement for absentee voting. Keep in mind, 1.3 million Georgians voted during the general election, and the mail-in voting was about 65% for Joe Biden. So it's skewed more for Democrats. They're making it harder to be able to submit your application. Now, outside groups can't send you an application anymore. Your county can't send you an application. You have to go online and ask for one. They are also making it so that you can't give out food and water to voters. You can't be within 25 feet of giving assistance to voters. Georgia was notorious for its long lines of up to 9 hours in some locations. And then the most egregious, I would say, is the state election takeover. So basically, in Georgia, we have all these county board electors that oversee the election process locally. And for example, I live in Gwinnett County, and we do, two people from the Gwinnett Democratic Party appoint. The Gwinnett Democratic Party appoints two people, and the Republicans appoint two people, and we have one independent person. So it's kind of a fair, balanced approach. Now Republicans can say, like, oh, well, your county isn't performing well. We're going to install whoever we want from the Republican legislature. So basically, a Republican takeover of county elections. And we can deem how many polling locations that you're allowed to have. If there's any discrepancies with ballots, we can choose which ones we want to move forth and which ones we want to throw away. And so it's an absolute, it's disgusting. And Republicans are the ones that are always touting, we need local control, less government. And they're the ones that are just like being super greedy here and taking over our election system. So
that last provision seems to me to be the real gist of this bill. Like everything else in there, I think is problematic in one way or another. But at the end of the day, if they basically can step in and say, like, okay, forget all that. Yeah. I know you paid attention to those things, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't. I mean, it's probably, but to take over, sort of, it's almost like the same thing as the emergency manager bill that ended up, poisoning all these children in Flint. It is basically just sort of this takeover, and then they can do just about anything, and that seems like, I mean, your average voter just is not terribly savvy about the fact that, like, hey, wait a second, the reason why it's hard for me to vote, or it's a pain in the ass for me to go find my polling places, is because of this bill that got passed 2 years ago. That just doesn't happen, right? I mean, that's the problem with this.
Oh, definitely. Like, it's a definite partisan power grab. And like, I didn't even know how bad it was until after my congressional election. My county party hired me to be like a strategist for them to help them communicate with low propensity voters and help with voter turnout during the general election. And I learned that the reason we only had 9 polling locations is because early voting locations, in comparison to other counties that had like a fourth of our population who had 20 of them, is because our county board, our county commission decided not to fund the decision that the county board made to expand voting locations. It's just, there's so many layers to this. Also, our Secretary of State, because in Gwinnett County, federally, we have to include Spanish and English on our absentee ballots. There was a delay in it. And so folks weren't able to get their ballots in time and couldn't vote in person. We had people fly in to go vote. And if you can take that over and like install whoever you want, you can change the rules. And something else that I'll even add was during the Senate runoff election, when they were counting votes in Gwinnett County, there were people that did not vote for Donald Trump, but wrote in Pence, okay? And they were trying to say that that was a vote for Trump and trying to push that through. And if it wasn't for, folks on our side that we had appointed that oversaw that process, we might not have known that that was happening. We were able to stop it with election lawyers. I mean, it's death by 1,000 cuts.
One of the cuts too, I feel like, can you expand on how this law targets the souls to the polls process? Because, from my understanding, I have notes on this from yesterday. Let me turn to that. But how essentially they make it a lot harder to vote on the weekends, which was a huge boon for Black voters, where churches would go and vote. And now early voting has to be done within work hours during the weekday, according to this bill. Is that correct?
So during the Georgia, when they were putting this law together a month ago, they were trying to get rid of Sunday voting. So if you were trying to figure out if their intentions were malicious, yes, they were. They were trying to suppress Black voters from voting because souls to polls, especially in Georgia, is a huge thing. And what they ended up doing was they required an extra Saturday of voting and under state law, but they're not requiring Sunday voting. So if you're a county, you can decide whether or not you want to have Sunday voting. Also, they did make it so that, you can only vote between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And it's up to a county if they want to let you vote, beyond that. But people get off jobs at 5 p.m. And a lot of these folks that are in working class jobs, they don't get off of work until 3 or 5, and with traffic, like, when are they going to go vote? And so, yeah, it definitely has a direct impact on our Black and brown communities.
One of the arguments that we're hearing from people is, well, okay, so you won Georgia anyways. Like the idea that the data shows that often when there are restrictive voting measures, this ends up bringing out more voters because, the argument goes that people become offended and more enthused to vote. But isn't it the case from your perspective? I mean, obviously you were involved in a big voter turnout drive, particularly for that senatorial campaign, that what happens is there's just more resources that are dedicated toward bringing out the vote. And if the playing field was leveled, if everyone had more access to voting, those resources would be deployed in other places or in other aspects, right? I mean, is that not the case?
So I would say more resources, always good, right? And you can always touch as many voters multiple times to make sure that they're voting. We should have these resources despite whether or not it is harder to vote. But I will say that when we were running our voter program during the Senate runoff targeting low propensity voters, a lot of these folks didn't know how to vote, or it said that it was too hard for them to vote. It was they make the if you make it harder, if you make it more complicated for people to understand how to get an absentee ballot, to stand in line. I mean, these lines are 5-6 hours long. People are not going to do it. And so we fundamentally just need to make it easier for people to exercise their constitutional right to vote.
But I mean, is that argument that these things can be overcome? It discounts the idea that means that more resources have to be dedicated towards just the basic idea of opening access as opposed to reaching even more voters.
Right. No, it does. It's we shouldn't have to spend millions of dollars trying to jump through these loopholes in order to tell people how they should be able to vote. I mean, that is ridiculous. It's unfortunate that not just in Georgia, but across the country, they're trying to pass all these laws because, they lost in the presidential election and they're trying to make their voters feel better.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of what's happening with corporations pushing back here. The Major League Baseball just moved the All-Star game from Atlanta to Colorado. to Coors Field, I guess, in Denver. Here is Mitch McConnell. This is, I think, yesterday, basically saying that corporations should not be involved in politics. And this is a little bit ironic, I think, if you've familiar here. Let's listen to this.
And I found it completely discouraging to find a bunch of corporate CEOs getting in the middle of politics. My advice to the corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics.
That's interesting. That runs counter to everything he's ever done in his entire career, including the Supreme Court case McConnell v. FEC, which McConnell sued the government because they limited corporations' ability to spend money on elections.
I have to add that he later added, "I'm not talking about political contributions." Literally, so.
The cover is based.
Wow.
Secret.
Nabila, what's your thoughts?
I think we should get corporations out of, politics and not, ban taking corporate PAC money 100%. So, look, I think what the corporations did in Georgia, Delta and the Coca-Cola CEO coming out and saying that this law is not good for voting rights. It's unacceptable. I'm glad they said something, but they didn't say anything really during the state legislature when they were passing this law. And I feel like corporations, at the end of the day, they care about their bottom line, and they're playing both sides. They're absolutely playing both sides. And we can't trust corporations with their voting rights. Okay, at the end of the day. So I think it's hilarious now that in Georgia, where Coca-Cola is founded, the Republican leadership is throwing out Coke cans and saying that they're going to drink Pepsi now. And I think it's ridiculous. And corporations can have a say, especially when it comes to these Republican politicians, because they take so much of their donations from corporations. They can sway a lot of these legislators, but they decided not to during this past session. So it's it's unfortunate.
I would also imagine that if we check back on these same corporations 2 or 3 years from now, their giving to Republicans is going to be anywhere from 10 to 15% higher than it is this year. They're going to make up for this. I mean, they will, when Mitch McConnell is sitting there saying, stay out of this, but we still accept money. He's basically saying, there's going to be a VIG on this. There's going to be another 10, 15% we're going to expect from you, I think, down the road. I mean, I think it's helpful just insofar as that it raises awareness for people. It's just one more story peg. But in the end, I agree with you. This is, people should not in any way allow these sort of this is just classic
it's just empty
whitewashing,
statements.
I guess.
Yeah. And then so you have, American Airlines is competing with Delta speaking out about this, and they have a significant presence, Nabila, right, in Georgia. And so now American Airlines has to put out their own corporate statement in order to one up Delta in terms of the PR wokeness, when really, if there's going to be any economic consequences, that's not going to come from top down from corporations and CEOs making statements for publicity. It's going to be from people withholding their economic power on the ground level.
Let's just watch. We got Bernie Sanders responds to McConnell's I guess, a call for CEOs to stay out of politics, except for when it comes to writing checks to Republicans. Here's Bernie Sanders on Chris Hayes' program last night.
You have been a critic of corporate power for a very long time, and so I have to imagine you feel very excited to have all these new collaborators and comrades who are going to link arms with you to very seriously take on corporate power in America from the Republican side.
It is just extraordinary, Chris. Imagine that after $1 trillion of tax breaks, the large corporations, after lowering the corporate tax rate, after protecting the pharmaceutical industry from charging us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, et cetera, Mitch McConnell and his friends are very upset that some corporations are now saying that it is an outrage that in Georgia, they are trying to destroy democracy and make it harder for people of color and low-income people to vote. Look, all of this is nothing more than a deflection, and you made that point well, a deflection against the reality that all over this country, what Republicans are doing is trying to protect their interests by making it harder for people who might be voting against them to participate in the political process. That means minorities. That means young people, people who are not sympathetic to their right-wing agenda. And our job is, among other things, to pass H.R. 1, an important piece of legislation which says that in America, if you're 18 years of age, no matter what they do in Georgia or any place else, you got the right to vote. That we get rid of. We finally move forward to address Citizens United. And by the way, as you know, Mitch McConnell was the biggest Senate defender of Citizens United and the ability of corporations to buy elections.
I mean, yeah.
Chris excited there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, give us a sense, Nabil, like when I mean, you've seen this sort of trajectory in Georgia. Where do you think Georgia will be in a year or two, or the next general election cycle, maybe even just like 18 months out from now?
So I think that we have a real opportunity to flip the governor's mansion. So if Stacey Abrams run for office for governor again, hopefully she does, she'll have power to veto a lot of this bad legislation coming out of the state legislature. I think that we will reelect Warnock in November 2022. So I think we'll stay blue. I will say, though, I'm a little worried about redistricting. And so the maps will change in about October, September, and they're going to make it so that they, rig the maps in their favor. And the way that we insulate Democrats can protect themselves is by making sure that we flip a lot of these statewide elections. And so I think Georgia, I'm hopeful that, based on what we saw in November during the Senate runoff, no one thought we were going to flip 2 Senate seats, that we'll be able to definitely not only win state level elections next year, but also some of these local municipality elections all across the state with mayors and city council members. And that's a huge thing. And so I'm hopeful that we're trending in the right direction and then we can reverse some of this bad legislation and hopefully HR 1 passes and saves a lot of us from a lot of these voter suppression tactics.
Is it your sense that the Democrats are the national Democrats or Democrats from other states or are coming to Georgia and saying like, what did you do? I mean, is there and obviously I know this is a very broad-based thing, and obviously Stacey Abrams had an organization, but there are other organizations in Georgia as well that we're working on this, and there's demographic changes and et cetera, but has it been your sense that there are people coming to look to figure out like what are best practices to do this? Like why? Like, I mean, in my mind, if you had asked me 5-6 years ago, 10 years ago, which state was going to have 2 Democratic senators and a potential to take back the governor, to take the governor, I would have said North Carolina before Georgia. But no. Is it your sense that there's like lessons to be learned in Georgia for other states, and are they taking advantage of that?
So people have asked me to speak about like, oh, what do you think that happened in Georgia? They're trying to find out what the secret sauce is. A lot of these southern states, especially. And what I will say is, I've been working in Democratic politics for 10 years, and the transition really happened. And I worked on the 2014 gubernatorial election for Jason Carter when he ran. It took Trump to really wake people up, but it took also transformational people to run for office, inspiring leaders like Stacey Abrams to run, that really got people excited to go vote and where they saw themselves in their candidate. I will say that the wins that we had in November and this past January were based on our coalition building. We have, our demographics have changed. By 2030, we will be a majority minority state. And what I will say that we did really well was the API groups, the Latino groups, the Black organizations. We all came together and we figured out what each one was doing, what we weren't, and we made sure we didn't overlap too much, so that we, were focused on the right targets, making sure that we touched everyone. I mean, it was very well organized. And I would say even like 6 years ago, a lot of these API groups, we were, small. And now we have a lot of leverage, a lot of resources coming our way. We have, it also did take, I will say this, I'm first generation daughter of immigrants, and it took me until my late 20s before I saw stronger talent take over, lead these organizations. So just because you have an organization doesn't mean you're doing anything if you don't have strong leaders, strong people with, people with strong visions to actually implement the work that you need to do. Because oftentimes what ends up happening is that you have a brain drain where people leave your state and they go work in what they think is a more competitive state. So I will say Georgia has a couple things. We now have a really good staffers, just the campaign workers. We are now building a bench whereas before we didn't really have one. And so we have people that are more reflective of our communities running for office. And I will also say that now we're having more resources coming. Before we were a flyover state, no one wanted to give us donations. Now people are spending resources. I would say it's an accumulation of all those things that definitely helped us win these past elections.
Is that staffer thing a generational thing?
So I would say yes. Like when I first started, I was the only brown Muslim girl, at every table, everyone was like a white dude, and that's slowly changed. I'm seeing more Black and brown, younger kids. I would say they're still in my class. There's not as many as I would have hoped, but Gen Z, these kids in their mid 20s, there's more Black and brown people, more folks that, especially in Georgia, that are willing to stay and learn the ropes instead of leaving. So I would say in the next 10 years, we're going to have some really awesome operatives that are running these organizations and hopefully teaching other states how to do the same.
I think Nabila Islam, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for both having me. Thank you
so much.
All right, bye-bye. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 447 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 447?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi. This is your bestest friend, Mr. Artie from London. Hello,
Artie
Emma.
from London. How are you?
Artie from London. How are you? What's on your mind?
Hi, guys. What's on my mind? I wanted to just sort of have a quick chat about Mr. Matt Binder and his dad. You guys do appreciate
I'm sorry, wait a second. I'm sorry. You want to have Artie, you want to have a conversation about Matt Binder and his dad?
No, but I want to apologize to them because I hope they don't think I have some kind of vendetta against them. But what I want to talk about is immigration.
Okay.
I wasn't born in the UK. I was made a refugee in the early 1990s after a war broke out. And what I have seen is a complete and utter hatred and deterioration of tolerance for refugees, especially among the white working class of the UK. Now, the majority report is the majority report. It's about American politics, and you're not necessarily interested about Britain. But where we, and I am a leftist, I was raised in a communist country, and communism radically changed people's lives for the better. They eradicated tuberculosis. They had, my country at the time had the best healthcare system in the Iron Curtain.
What country were you from, if you don't mind, Artie?
Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia? Okay.
Yeah. And we had to flee because we watched sort of grenades exploding in the street, and my sister was butchered. So, we had to hop on our little bike and come to the UK. So I've lost the accent. So I was very young when the war started. And I can see that hatred within the white working class. And the reason I can see it is because they feel displaced. Now, we arrived here very, very early on in the 1990s after Margaret Thatcher had just got through her deindustrialization policy. She devastated industry. She had devastated social housing, and that's not been replaced. And we had Jeremy Corbyn often going on and saying, well, it's not the immigrants' fault. The government needs to spend more, to meet the needs of the immigrant who is here legally or illegally. Usually they're here legally, so you can't blame the immigrant. But that was falling on deaf ears because that money wasn't being spent on the white working class, especially in the middle of the UK, where white boys and girls are doing far, far worse than black girls and Asians in London. They're falling behind, and they're being left behind.
What do you mean by what do you mean by that, though? What does that mean?
Academically.
Academically,
academically, they are going to be much poorer than their parents. Their diet is worse than their parents. We've just had a massive increase in rickets.
In rickets?
Rickets was a disease. Rickets.
Oh, okay.
Which is a disease of a lack of calcium and D3 in childhood. Your bones bent.
Yeah.
Not cricket, but rickets.
No, rickets.
I don't know if there's an Americanism for it. So the left here and in the United States must insist that, look, there's got to be an end to immigration. And asylum, no, you can't stop asylum seekers because that is their human right to seek asylum. But where we kind of are struggling to come up with a counter-argument is that why have we allowed, for example, here in Europe, somebody to travel from the coast of Libya through Italy, through Germany, through France, and then they've sought asylum in London? Then you do have to wonder, are these people genuinely in fear of their lives? Yes, they will have their day in court, but it's not the most tragic thing if it's been adjudicated that they need to go, and they need to go. Now, my type of politics, mine and Jamie Peck's type of politics, it's just not wanted here. We saw what happened with Mr. Corbyn, and I think you're not going to be able to convince the poor of America that the problems of the rich of America are not their problems too. When I see Fox News spew that message every single night, I feel sick to my stomach, and I just...
All right, so Artie, if I'm hearing what you're saying, that that you're saying that you're a little skeptical of the asylum claims of people from, let's say, Libya, although that's not the place.
No, they're coming. They're using the Libyan coast to jump off. They're paying money. Usually, the people who are being picked up, they're not Libyans. They are Afghanis. They're Africans, Black Africans, who usually can pay up to $10,000 to get a people smuggler to do that for them.
Well, I understand. But there's a process to adjudicate the asylums, right? I don't know the British system.
And that's absolutely, we agree on that point, yeah.
And
common ground there.
And I imagine the methodology of adjudicating changes based upon the disposition of the administration, right? I mean, certainly Trump changed, wholesale certain categories of issues that no longer constituted a legitimate asylum claim in this country. I mean, so there is some subjective.
Not in the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
not in the UK, because we are signatories of an international.
Well,
treaty.
I understand, but
I
understand. We're signatories too, but Jeff Sessions said domestic violence not a a legitimate claim for asylum in this country, for instance, when it used to be. I mean, so you can eliminate wholesale categories like that. I mean, so I'm not exactly sure I understand ultimately what your point is, but it's possible we may.
My point is.
Yeah, go ahead.
My point is that immigration is not necessarily the best thing in the world for the people who are living within your nation state. The United States has the reason why you got free college when you were growing up, perhaps, Sam, and you don't get it now, is because when these wars of attrition broke out in Eastern Europe and in the global South, America handpicked some of the most intelligent, the best and the brightest. I have family in the States for which they did not pay a single penny to invest in. And now you're asking those quote-unquote native, those who are native to the land, who may have lived there since, I don't know, they came over from the Mayflower. You're asking them to foot massive amounts of loans and all sorts. And what I'm saying is that where you've got an immigrant who's been given, for example, in my situation, I have family who live in California, who the husband is an electronic engineer. He was educated for free in the former Yugoslavia. He was handpicked by the Americans, plonked into Silicon Valley. They didn't have to spend a single dollar on his education. He had a PhD from Yugoslavia. And what I'm saying is that that's how you're leaving your poor behind, because you're refusing to.
But I mean, the fact is that, look, I mean, and you can look at the data, the net in terms of what immigrants do in terms of productivity and paying taxes in this country, the net is a positive one. But there is absolutely simply no data to support. I honestly don't know what the dynamic is in the UK, but there's no data to support the argument that immigrants are taking away resources from native-born Americans. There's just no data to support it. I mean, and
except your huge, massive deficit, and because
first of all, the deficit. There's absolutely no way that you can in any way make a direct line between our deficit. And this is even aside from the conversation as to whether our deficit even matters. But there's no way you can.
It matters. It doesn't matter to you because you're the major sort of the dollar is the
right. I'm talking about the United States. I'm talking about
I'm
talking about the United States. I honestly don't know the dynamic in Great Britain, and you guys have the ability to print your own.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying do not bring. That there has to be a limit. There must be. In order to have immigration, to keep immigration politically viable as something good and intrinsically good, we are, and as leftists, we're losing this argument throughout Europe. We are very, very close to history repeating itself in the most horrific way.
I think, listen, the way that you deal with these immigration, to the extent that what you're saying has any truth to it, right? That from a political standpoint, there is, as opposed to an actual material standpoint, there is a limit in which a country can tolerate immigration, which I imagine you would say is elastic based upon how the country's doing at any time. To the extent that there needs to be an addressing of this issue. And I think the same goes for the United States. The way you address that issue is to avoid situations like what we have done in Central America, what we have done as a world to like the Middle East, creating the situations that drive people from their countries. If we really want to address the potential threat and destabilization that exists in any given country from immigration, which, I will stipulate only for the sake of this argument. I'm not quite convinced, and I really frankly don't know, UK politics enough to say something definitive about it. I know that we, from a material standpoint in this country, certainly have the ability. I actually think also from a political standpoint, we can sustain it in this country as well. But nevertheless, the reason why people, broadly speaking, why they become refugees and why they go to other places, and your family is a perfect example of it, right? You didn't say like, we really wanted to come to, my family really wanted to get to the UK. It was because we had to leave our home. And so we did.
But I do a distinction between immigration and asylum seek, because those are two different things.
Yes, but that's simply, on some level that's simply semantics. If your country,
legally it's quite important.
Well, legally it's important, but that's adjudicated. That's adjudicated. And so
we're not immigration judges, and we're not going to adjudicate it on this telephone. But what I'm saying to you is that we have got a problem with immigration, and I don't mean that I don't like these people. I
understand what you're saying. There is a political problem with it. I get it. But the fact of the matter is that by narrowing immigration, you understand that political problem doesn't go away if you have 10% less immigrants or 20% less immigrants.
Also, are we sure we have a political problem here? Because favorability towards increasing immigration is just going up in this country and has been for the last 20 years. So I don't think this is super relevant to the American context.
Yes, I don't think it's relevant to the American context. I think we can sustain it both politically and definitely materially. But if you're telling me that there is a problem in Europe, in Europe, I'm telling you that problem doesn't go away if you decrease immigration by 10 or 15 or 20%. That problem is
decreasing immigration. It's not about decreasing it. These people are already here. What I am saying is that we need to start, as a leftist brethren and sisterhood, is coming up with a better way of putting immigration, a better strategy of speaking about immigration, because sooner or later things are going to blow. And my little radar.
All right. Well, listen, Artie, I appreciate it. We spent a lot of time.
I fear it.
Okay.
I really do fear it.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. Bye-bye. All right. Nice guy. What is your favorite type of trouser?
Are you talking about you?
Trouser? I am. Yeah. I don't know.
I wear like pants that, basically could be leggings, but they look more like pants because I don't
I go through different stages. For Carhartts for a long time were my favorite trouser, and now they're I'm like wearing a lot of corduroys these days.
Yeah, you're not a jean guy. I've realized.
I'm not a jean guy. No, I got a pair of lined jeans for the winter, and my daughter freaked out. She was very excited, and then I never pursued him.
I sometimes I'll even wear, I said this to Matt when you weren't in. I was feeling, rushing in the morning. I wore a nice shirt on top or sweatpants.
There you go. You can get away with that.
I can. I don't show my legs on camera.
Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. Excuse me. It's Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. Long time no talk to. How are you, sir?
Good. That caller basically summed it up for me. Remember when people said psych?
Yeah, I do.
Real quick on that call, two things. The things that they said were sort of nefarious, like people, non-Libyans crossing on the Libyan coast, traveling across multiple European countries to get to Britain and paying large sums of money to get there, I would suggest are not nefarious at all. The Libyan coast happens to be one way to get to Europe, and it's fairly close. So that's not unusual. That's just a thing that people do. They can't fly to Britain, so they have to figure out a way to get there by land. A lot of people probably don't speak Italian or German or French, and so they're trying to get to an English-speaking country where they probably have family or friends.
Right.
And then the cost, I mean, usually those costs are a couple different things. Pooled by family or friends to get them there. Or it could be somebody who worked hard and has access to that money, but their life is in danger. And
also,
so they
for
have to
example,
flee.
France is like incredibly hostile to immigrants, specifically Muslim ones, and we're seeing that right now, even in comparison to the UK.
Yeah, so I mean, exactly. There's lots of reasons why people would do the things that they outlined there that don't include, like, they must be Al-Qaeda or something like that. And people should just try to get to know some people like that, or spend a little bit of time thinking about it or reading their stories to try and figure out.
I got the sense that what Artie was trying to make a case, and it may be the case, and I'm going to just give him the benefit of the doubt that he's making that case of the UK, because like I say, I think in this country we can both materially and politically sustain, frankly, more immigration in this country. I don't think that I just don't think it's. I think there is a serious contingency in this country of anti-immigrant sentiment, but I don't think it's overwhelming in any way. And the bottom line is, even if this is the argument that he's making, the idea that this is fixed, that it is immutable, that it can be improved by knocking those numbers down in some way, or, I don't know how you talk about it differently to convince people who have this anti-immigrant sentiment. I think what you do is you bring in more immigrants, and you get people used to the idea of immigrants being around, and that's it. I mean, that's
they're
my
undergoing that growing pain process in Scandinavian countries, like right now, pretty much.
I wanted to share a conversation I had with a client today. She.
People should just keep that in mind if you are looking for Ronald Reagan to be your attorney. Apparently, he just doesn't feel.
Her alien number is no. So she has applied for her daughter to come to the U.S. And it's been a couple of years now. We're still working on it, and everything got hung up with COVID and the Trump stuff. And we're just waiting for an interview at this point, but it is taking a long time. And she said this thing about how unfair it is, all this stuff that's going on at the border, and those people get to just sort of like show up, and meanwhile, they're trying to do things, the right way, and they're bogged down in bureaucracy. And in a way, it's sort of an echo of what the last caller was saying, which is, these false divisions and distinctions. And I tried to explain, very gently, that the people at the border aren't getting a free pass. They've got incredibly difficult paths ahead also. And the solution is not to improve her pathway by making another pathway more complicated, but to improve the pathways for everybody and to make these processes, quicker and faster. And in fact, one thing that makes the border conversation complicated is it is sort of this multifaceted, multi-layered thing where even like the fact that family-based petitions are taking so long, or it's impossible to get a tourist visa or to come and, on a work visa or whatever, those other pathways are so restricted that it puts increased pressure on on things like requesting asylum at the border. Whereas if those people had other quick ways to come, they would obviously be doing that, and that would save everybody time and money and all those things. And so and then meanwhile, like the immigration court system that is supposed to be adjudicating asylum claims continues to be like a complete kangaroo court, and it's been functionally destroyed over the last 4 years. And they haven't done anything to fix that, by the way, since. Well, let's
address this, because there's a couple of different dynamics that are going on here, right? One is that there has been like material degradation to the system that existed as insufficient as it was before, material degradation to it during the Trump years. And then the question is like, what is the Biden administration doing, A, on a policy level, and then B, on an administrative level, and what could they be doing better? Like, I mean, if you were in charge of the system today and you saw that, okay, we're now warehousing all of these children, right? And like, what would you do? Would you say, okay, we're going to get rid of, and even aside from the fact that like Title 42, I think by all accounts is a violation of both statutes in this country and international law. Would you say, okay, we're going to let in the parents as well? Would you say we just need to throw money at this, or we're going to relax certain restrictions on placing children with their relatives? Like, what would you do at this point if you could address this, broadly speaking, instead of just sitting in your office and calling this show?
I think I'm doing a pretty good job of fixing it right now. No, so I think that you were right the other day when you said that we need resources that aren't obviously like military dropouts, aka ICE, cop, police academy dropouts or whatever. We need like social workers and people who can help locate or relocate and place the children. The family thing, I mean, Obama's solution was to detain families for long periods of time, even families with like people they could be settled with here. And that was sort of this weird, I mean, it was supposed to be a deterrent, basically.
Right.
And that was sort of arbitrarily applied. Like there were lots of people who just weren't detained and then other people who were. So that's not really the solution. You just need more resources to help get people settled. There were programs in place under the Obama administration to help people make sure they know when they have a court. And Trump did away with that. And so immigrants are coming in with, it's actually really crazy. Like they get a notice to appear in court that doesn't have a date or a time for a hearing. Basically, they're saying we're going to mail you a hearing date in the future. And I'm just one practitioner, but I have like dozens of clients who came in the last several years who their notice to appear was never even filed in the immigration court. So they're just here. And they still haven't had a hearing date because either ICE didn't file it or the immigration court misplaced it. And so there's just a lot of, there's too many things to list. But in terms of the court, the first thing they should do is honestly, like, administratively close all the cases. There's over 1 million cases in immigration court. And then just say that the parties can recalendar the cases they think are important by motion. And then that would allow the judges to focus on, recent arrivals and to make sure that those cases are adjudicated quickly and fairly. But there's lots of other changes.
So first step would be just to say, like, all these cases, forget about it. Like, if you're in the country, you're in the country. Like, you're in the country, unless, like, customs has like a specific issue, right? Is that basically it? Like all of these, like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So like, Obama did a pretty good job. I remember going to a hearing at the end of the Obama administration where an ICE trial attorney, a prosecuting attorney, stood up and said, who wants their case closed? Like, come up here and let me know, and we'll just get you off the docket. And the idea was, like, this will allow us to focus on recent arrivals and people with serious criminal history, which is a paradigm I reject personally, but that's, okay. So if you've got 5 domestic violence arrests, sorry, we're not closing your case. We're going to move forward with it. And Trump did away with that and put a bunch of new people in removal proceedings, including I've got a couple of clients who their abusive partners called the police on them, and now they're in removal proceedings because of that encounter with police. And so the system is just weighed down by having too many people in it. I mean, really what you need is an amnesty, obviously, but short of that, you could say, we're parking all these cases, and we're clearing all the dockets. If the government has somebody that they feel is a threat to the community or somebody that they really are worried about having deported, they can file a motion to recalendar that case. And conversely, like, there's a lot of immigrants whose only pathway to legalization is through removal proceedings, which is another fucked up part of the system. But if an immigrant has an application for relief that they want to pursue, they can file a motion to recalendar. But right now, I mean, it's the whole thing is just in shambles. So
ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
It's really horrible. And actually, like, I got to get my shots in at Biden and the Biden administration. Day one, he signs this thing saying basically, like, we're going back to the Obama priorities, which is great. But to this day, the ICE prosecutors haven't received any guidance. And so they're not willing to stipulate to anything, even when you have, like, all the facts laid out and you've met your burden, because it's the immigrant's burden to prove eligibility for relief. They're still unwilling to say, like, yeah, you've met your burden. So we have to go to trial and put on, like, 3 hours of testimony. And then they'll admit at the end, like, they're not opposed to relief. But after all this time, I've tried to be really patient with them, but this is not like rocket science. It's going back to, Biden's old boss's policy. And, hopefully we get there eventually, but it's just another thing where
when I hear that story of Bill Clinton seeing what's going on in California in 1994, and that he was worried about losing California in 1996 and therefore made his policies more restrictive, that's what makes me think about what's going on with Biden. That there are people in his administration who are just like, look, we can just sort of, we're not getting grief about this, and so let's do nothing.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
I mean, yeah, they're scared of their own shadow in some ways, for sure. I think a lot of this stuff is so granular that it could be changed without, obviously
anybody knowing about it.
It's going to get picked up by Fox probably, right. And they're gonna say it's something bigger than it really is. So I guess that's, but you know what? Like, they say Biden is for open borders.
Right.
So,
that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the thing that I think they don't understand. Like in these that the Democrats don't understand. I really don't think they understand this. And I'm just looking at this from purely a political standpoint, right? Because they clearly don't have the humanitarian impulse to sort of like take what they even perceive to be a minor risk. But there is no risk associated with this. It seems to me like the claims are so audacious already that the idea that Fox is going to go on there like Joe Biden is for open borders and also incidentally has paved the way administratively for judges to excuse certain cases under it just doesn't. It's just, I don't know. It's ridiculous. But Ronald Reagan, I appreciate your calling in and telling us about it.
I had a jokey call where I was going to call in as Dennis Miller with suggested burns of Dave Rubin. I've got some good Dennis Miller, not Dave Rubin. What's his name? Glenn Greenwald. I've got some good Dennis Miller, Glenn Greenwald.
I think you already made the
in the bag.
Interesting confusion there.
Yeah.
Well, All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Please
Appreciate
save that.
Speaking of jokes, this is hilarious. You know, every couple of years, and it usually happens like when, you know, they feel like they've got nothing to talk about. The Fox News rolls out another iteration of a right-wing comedy show. And Greg Gutfeld has been part of a lot of it. Like they had Red Eye that I think Gutfeld got his start on. I think it was Gutfeld. And then they had another show. I can't remember what it was, but it was like their answer to Saturday Night Live or something like that on Fox. It was really short-lived and stunningly atrocious. And people are like, why doesn't right-wing comedy really work?
Well, I mean, you have worked in comedy. I would want to ask you about that, especially because it seems like you're deliberately shunning Greg Gutfeld by mispronouncing his name on a regular basis.
Is it not Gutfeld?
No,
Gutfeld. Well, I
thought this was kind of a way to belittle him.
No. I mean, I think we can belittle him by just playing parts of his show.
You're right. That's more efficient.
I will tell you after this why right-wing comedy fails. Here is, I think this is the debut show, right? This is the debut show, guys? Debut, and it's on at 11 p.m.
Look at this.
It's got the Jeb exclamation point at the end of it.
Yeah, it's Gutfeld.
That's why he has that shit-eating grin on his face.
Here we go. Listen to this. This is part of the monologue.
You all made a great choice. For proof, over at MSNBC, let's see what Brian Williams...
He's saying, Gutfeld is saying, you made a great choice in tuning into this show at 11 p.m. So yeah,
because it's meant to compete with the Colberts and it's late night comedy.
You all made a great choice. For proof, over at MSNBC, let's see what Brian Williams is up to right now.
Good evening, I'm Brian Williams, and I am on Mars. Yes, I jumped on a chopper and now I'm on Mars. I've been here for a year now. I built a castle here made of mastodon carcasses and marshmallows. This is where I invented all the COVID vaccines, as well as penicillin, the smartphone, and Fluffernutter.
Some things never change. Meanwhile, what's on CNN?
You, sir, are a racist. Racist, white male racist.
You're the racist.
Awful. That's from the Don Lemon Hour, who reports the news with the same look your mother gave you when she found weed in your sock drawer. As for those late night shows we're supposed to compete against, why bother? Who do they offend?
You can't handle it.
No, can't handle it anymore. Weed in your sock drawer, he was never smoke weed. That's for hippies.
The first joke was about Brian Williams. He told a big lie about
no one does that on Fox.
being in like a thing. It was pretty egregious, and that happened 6 years ago.
I know, it was very topical.
Which is why when they did the joke, no one even laughed, even though it was scoring the political points that they wanted to, laugh about. So here's the reason why right-wing comedy doesn't work. And it is because it's not funny. It's not funny.
Wow.
And it doesn't make you laugh unless you're actually Greg Gutfeld and you're laughing because you want people to think that the joke was funny.
Right. You can't say Gutfeld.
Gutfeld. Feld. What difference does it make?
Yeah, people think things are objectively funny or not, but if you laughed at that, it was literally just because of your insecurities. That hearing somebody say, you're racist, white male, like if that makes you laugh, that says more about you than it says about the writing at Gutfeld.
Well, that was also, I think, like more of like a cheer thing. Like that's the thing, is that they want their comedy to always score points more than they actually want it to be funny. And even when you want like a satire to score points, which is really the point of satire. It's really to illuminate things rather than it is to like sort of own somebody.
Yeah.
They don't understand that concept. And
it's just a different flavor of owning the libs, which is what so much of right-wing, reactionary politics has become. I mean, that's what Trump was.
Exactly. And like there are times where it could be mildly amusing, like Trump could be mildly amusing, but more so just because like it was real.
Yeah.
It's when like oh my God, this guy's the president of the United States. This is insane.
Or just like the bombacity and the fact there's a guy saying this in a presidential campaign. It was more the absurdity, not the cleverness.
Exactly. And the problem with a show like Gutfeld's or Fields or whatever he's calling himself these days is that they're trying to be funny.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it really that much more painful.
It's extremely painful because of he's also just very smug about it too. And does he have a comedy writing background? Like
I'm pro smugness. I think people know that. So I'm definitely in favor. I don't think smugness is necessarily disqualifying. And I think he wrote for Maxim. So
like the women's underwear magazine?
Yeah.
Is that what they were calling it these days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's certainly why I read Maxim as a teenage boy, is for Gutfeld's great columns.
That's his thing. He's like he's writing comedy for teenage boys, but but
also pretty bad a Brian Williams impression. He's got a distinct voice.
That was also impressive. Like, wow. I mean, I feel like I'm not a particularly good impressionist, but I feel like give me 5 minutes and I could come up with a better Brian Williams impression.
Yes.
They really just sort of mailed that whole thing in.
I've got a bit of a palate cleanser of a comedian as his first night as the band leader on Gutfeld.
Oh, all right. Let's check this out.
Oh my God, there's a band.
Oh, bummer. Where do you come up with this stuff, Greg? Haha, Greg, Joe Biden is not young. Gutfeld? Oh man, Greg, you're killing harder than Hillary. Benghazi. I guess I'll just AOC myself out. Okay, you're crazy, Greg, but the welfare state is corrosive to our beautiful Constitution. Well, another Gutfeld gutbuster. Come on, Greg, you're gonna make me spit out my liberal tears. Greg, you were wild. You got more bite than Major Biden. Gutfeld? Oh, bum.
That's actually, that's the beauty. I mean, to a certain extent, Gutfeld is inspiring a lot of great comedy. It's just really coming more at his expense.
Yeah, and again, they deride the liberals for liking whatever late night comedy and they say, oh, it's just ridiculous that Hollywood doesn't represent us, and then they try to and they can't fit in. They desperately want to be a part of the thing that they think
it's going to be fascinating to see
lame.
if it works there. How long they'll give that a chance to continue on. But I this is the way they're going to bring in the young people to that network. Very exciting. Yeah. One of the other ways that they may. Oh wait. Oh, here's. This is Gutfeld on his on a round table, right? I guess they do some like
Bill Maher-esque thing.
Yeah. What is this? Gutfeld is trying to make the.
He's talking about Amazon and like the story and trying to like set it.
Oh, okay. So they're covering the news. Yeah. Here we go. How is this different from the 5? I don't know.
I happen to think that this story is unfair to the drivers who, let's face, are. They're driving, they have to use the facilities, so they need to whatever. I don't even know how to discuss this.
Well, that was an excellent question, Greg. Look.
Oh, I do. And they're talking about he feels bad for the drivers because we're saying, because we've told on Amazon that they basically don't provide for their drivers and that they've got to pee in a bottle.
That's funny.
I feel like the drivers have been making these disclosures themselves, actually.
Can you guys go back to the logo on the floor? Why does it look like it's some sort of Cheetos thing? Like it looks like either Garfield or, I don't know. It looks like some sort of cheesy fast food.
Gutfeld, there it is, yeah.
It looks like the Garfield logo.
It looks like the Garfield.
It does look like Garfield.
This is
Cheetos.
They are trying
Meets
to
Jeb.
have a funny font.
Yeah, I mean, like they have to make it, like the Cheese Whiz can that you see at ShopRite.
This is Red Eye. They're doing Red Eye. They're just doing it earlier, and they called it Gutfeld. Well, all right,
I mean, like, okay, the whole set's blue, and yet you have an orange. It looks like shit, is what I'm trying to say.
All right.
I'm mad.
You're really mad about it.
It's just like,
Well,
do better, folks.
Yeah, Gutfeld's just not happening for. Here is Tucker Carlson though, and going out on a limb, sticking up for Piers Morgan, and I sort of missed, I think, part of that in real time. That I didn't realize he stormed off the set because he had like some weird fixation with what's her face, the
Well,
princess.
I sent you that
Markle.
montage. Princess No Longer. I sent you that montage of him, how they went for a drink.
Yeah, so
Then
weird.
she started dating Prince Harry. Who knows if the drink was platonic or not, but it sparked this like intensity where Piers Morgan became obsessed with Meghan Markle.
Here's Tucker Carlson the other night trying to suggest that Piers Morgan is just like an average dude.
Piers Morgan was forced off the air last month. We were told it was because he had insulted the fake.
Pause.
He was not forced. He walked off and quit. That's all. I have to say. He literally walked off the set and then went, and the executive said that he resigned and they accepted his resignation over at his morning show, and I forgot what it is.
He was forced to walk off because he had to address the fact that he had some type of personal issue with somebody that he was making an assessment about on TV. But go ahead.
Piers Morgan was forced off the air last month. We were told it was because he had insulted the fake Duchess from Los Angeles. But on some level, it wasn't really about her or even about him. It was about all of us and our right to say what we think is true in a supposedly free country. It was about free speech and the freedom of conscience.
Pause it.
Of course.
First off, it happened in the UK.
Yeah.
It happened in England.
Different
which
free speech
doesn't
laws
have
there,
the same
by
free
the way.
speech laws. But even in this country, where we have an expansive view of free speech, people get fired on television shows all the time. There is no First Amendment right to have your own TV show, or I would go further, there's also no First Amendment right to have your own TV show and not have a guest call you on something and you not have to hear it and then storm off. But good.
Also, he quit.
Our right to say what we think is true in a supposedly free country. It was about free speech and the freedom of conscience. He, of course, is still editor-at-large at Daily Mail, and what he writes is still worth reading. But he's not on television right now. And again, that has implications for the freedom of speech around the...
Because he quit. Because he quit his show. Because he walked off. He quit the show.
Even if he gets fired, I mean, like,
he quit the show.
what was the guy's name from, I think he was on CNN. Was it who got fired because he spoke about Palestinian rights off of, not even on camera? Do you know what I'm talking about? Lamont?
Mark Lamont Hill.
Yeah, Mark Lamont Hill. Can we play the clip of Tucker Carlson when he made a big issue about Mark Lamont Hill getting fired because he deigned to talk about Palestinian rights? I mean, come on. Like, it's just unbelievable. I'll tell you what amazes me about Tucker Carlson more than anything
That
else.
Piers Morgan quit and it's not even relevant?
What amazes me about Tucker Carlson is this dude knows, like, you know, like Sean Hannity is a liar, but Sean Hannity is like really dense. I mean, really dense. Like, how does this guy figure out how to tie a shoe? Dense. But Tucker Carlson's not an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what he's doing. And the idea that he can deliver this with a straight face, I almost think the reason why he's got such a grimace on his face the entire time, like, you know, he's always like, is because that's the only way he can keep himself from laughing.
Yeah, I mean, John Oliver did the whole segment on, old clips of Tucker Carlson basically saying, I think it was going after Pat Buchanan, saying that, pushing an aggrievement, cultural button is just the only arrow he has in his quiver, and it's kind of cheap. And that now that's exactly what Tucker Carlson does on a daily basis.
Absolutely. It's just, I think that it's impressive that the guy never cracks up. I mean, because he knows what he's saying is such bull.
Yeah. And, yes, the summation of the Piers Morgan thing was that he was insanely unhinged about a woman speaking out about the racism of the crown and the royalty in the United Kingdom, because it's one, mixed up with nationalism for that country and this weird obsessive patriotism, and two, because he was clearly in some way sexually attracted to her in some dark way and was mad that she didn't go on a second date with him. It's just like, and so then he quit, but apparently that's a First Amendment concern.
Right, but even if all of that wasn't the case, it still wouldn't be a First Amendment concern. Even if it happened in this country and not in Great Britain where they don't have...
And even if he was actually fired.
The whole idea is his trying to, argue and inflame his viewers' sense of aggrievement, that they are somehow being silenced because they cannot express the misogynist or racist views that they have in some way, or views that are perceived as misogynist and racist by other people.
Yeah, Brendan writes to us, does anyone have more contempt for his audience than Tucker? I
think that's
so well
true.
said,
I think that's absolutely true. I think that it is like...
He gets off on manipulating them into this cultural... And it's also what's scary too is his audience is younger than the other...
yeah.
That this is the new frontier.
All right, folks, I don't have any more time for calls. Appreciate it. Sorry. Let's go. Let's see. I
still can't even get over how he's trying to spin that
that was
impressive.
Piers
was fired.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. You got to really have a tremendous amount of contempt for the people who watch your show.
Because then they could, just by a Google search.
Sweardarta. I feel like the hyper-focus on the president sometimes results in giving cover to how power works in the government. For example, the way people talk about immigration, you think Biden could simply wave his hand and reform the system while providing funding for 5-star hotels for all asylum seekers. Well, I mean, I think Ronald Reagan, showed at least one thing that he could do that wouldn't really involve any cash. Chris from Taiwan, apparently even U.S. states controlled by white supremacists can count their votes faster than Amazon. I don't understand this at all. Slovai, preemptive congratulations on getting fully vaxxed, Sam. Looking forward to a fun half tomorrow when you use your newfound 5G math powers to properly address Eric Weinstein's grand... Oh, this is from yesterday, I think. Oh, yeah, this is from yesterday. Okay, let's see. What is your favorite type of trouser? I think answer that. Tishka, since the assault weapon ban expired, a decade has passed and mass shootings have gone up by 200%. We need a bill that keeps people safe. Will Biden act? I don't think it's really a function of Biden at this point. I think it's a function of President Manchin. It's possible. We may get something, though. Nerd Cheetah. Will there be some breaking point or limit in regards to lecherous pervs and weirdos that supposed party of family values and Christian morality will be able to bear? Matt Gaetz had that chilling, arrogant, entitled creeper vibe from day one, and apparently a bunch of people knew. But I guess it's like Fight Club. You know the first rule and the second rule. Armin, might be really interesting for you to interview Professor Eden Medina on her book, Cybernetic Revolutionaries, Technology and Politics in Allende's Chile. It has challenged my notion of what democratic planning of a socialist state economy could look like. Project Cybersyn really grappled with notions of democratic centralized control and decentralized worker involvement. The Internationalist Democratic Social was destroyed in Baku in 1973. It's been forgotten and really deserves another try. That's interesting. That might be interesting. Let me just copy that there. Okay. Bear with me. Oh,
I got it, Sam.
Okay. Hot, gay, fleshy apparatus. Important to mention that Biden has still not signed off on the new refugee numbers. Resettlement agencies are just waiting to be able to settle folks, but can't accept anyone. Yeah, there is stuff that Biden could do without a doubt. Moon in the lake. I think Sam and Emma are great together as a team. Thank you. Arrows in my quiver. You suck, Sam. Emma's way better than you. Thank you. Jimmy Dorable. Sam, I must say that you could just look at having Emma start the show so that the show starts on time every day. Dab 1. Emma does the phone line better. Not a sports question. I have a very elementary query, but for argument's sake, what do you think is the most simple, most direct rebuttal to the position lauding the benefits of low tax, no tax states like Florida? Would someone taking that position even care about such a rebuttal if their personal wealth is great enough to fund self-interest over common good? My answer for the second part is no. I mean, I would say all of that is a function of, basically where one is positioned in society. Right? I mean, they don't care about how bad their unemployment insurance program is if they have a job. It's not, a lot of people who lost their job during COVID in Florida began to appreciate what the problem was. Justin from Urca, from California. Awa. Maddie Light, the new Jordan Peterson, Ta-Nehisi Coates drama is amazing. Can we please have you laugh at Jordan Peterson for old time's sake? We got to pull that. It's pretty nuts. Matt, all right, Sam, where are all the libertarian debates you promised us if Biden won? I've been patiently waiting. We sort of had one yesterday, but not quite. Real ace attorney. Emma's great, but I also found it kind of mean putting Sam down like that emailer. Having said that, Matt whites the floor with Sam. It's not even close. Christo, is your 15-year-old as miserable from the past year as mine? Seems like I'm probably not. I'm worried about the long-term effects on him. Maybe there's a guest suggestion from the MR universe geared to the topic of young adults and COVID. I've read stuff. You know what? We were talking about that. Brendan, right? We should try and find somebody maybe who can speak to those issues. My daughter has been okay during this. Not great, but okay. I know others who have had real troubles at that age. Glad to see you include the Antifada and plugs today. By the way, Mutts Butts. To Artie, I think immigrants were trying to get to Ireland, but because the channel was too short, they were stranded in England, stayed for dental care. Just kidding, on the square. Joanna, I didn't want to say anything, but after you read the email about how much better Emma was than you, I feel emboldened. Indeed, Emma is vastly superior in presentation and knowledge than you. She didn't even blow you.
Knowledge for sure. Maybe some presentation.
She didn't even blow your cover when you were at your other job taking care of G. Gordon Liddy. When's your next vacation so we can cash in on office Deadpools? Boston Bernie Bro, when you eventually make another hire, ostensibly to replace Jamie, please make sure they're not just a hardcore Marxist, but also someone who can't stop talking about European soccer. Wigglin, we should never trust corporations or government, one thing that whistleblowers have taught us. Till, Nabila Islam is a national treasure. Highly recommend her inspiring recent appearance on Ben Dixon's show. Michael from Bavaria, on Monday, the Supreme Court ruled for Google in the Oracle versus Google lawsuit. Good news for everyone in IT and consumers. I got to check that out. Joyce from PA. Feel like you worked the dementia story against Biden too hard in the primary, and you kept working that angle for several weeks after it was clear Biden was going to be the Democratic candidate. Any regrets? Do you still believe Biden has dementia? I would be surprised if Biden doesn't have some, beginnings of cognitive deterioration, but I'm relatively happier than I thought I would be with his administration. I mean, his performance definitely seems better as of sometime around the first or the second or last debate. He did better than I think that he did.
Maybe the campaigning was kind of hard for him.
Maybe there's treatments, which I also know is the case. John, if you had one word to describe Emma and Matt's job hosting last week, it would be adequate, although they did manage to host the show on time and not play Friday's intro on Monday, so the bar was not that high. Prairie Fire Kowalski. Hey, I'm our crew. I'm not sure if Emma's better overall to Sam. I think for long-time listeners, we've heard many of Sam's stories and understand his train of thought. Emma has news stories and a sports advantage, jocks all the way, so people might find Emma as a fresh perspective. Also, most of the audience are millennials, and it's nice to hear from one of our own over another boomer. I'm not a boomer. Leftist poggers! Jidabar. Hey, you had a clip of a movie guy at a town hall walks in and says the politician just hit him with a car. The politician and town hall are real, but the guy hit was one of the actors. I can't find the clip anywhere.
Oh,
it's the
Good Liars must be, right?
Good Liars. Yeah. The Good Liars. Keep kicking ass and smoking grass. Thank you.
which politician was that? Tom Steyer?
I think so, yeah. Rube Davin. Is this caller Milo Yiannopoulos? Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Don't worry, Sam. I think you guys are equally poggers. I would love to see Emma's sports ball podcast, so I have a place to call in with my political questions. Neutrality. Weird how conservatives keep running interference to defend the British monarchy. In a sane world, I think this would be enough to give them pause, but we all know how honest people like Tucker are about their true beliefs compared with what they said to get paid. On your left, I actually feel bad for Artie when Binder made fun of him originally, but after this call, he can jog on. Thank God for Ronald Reagan. Arduin. What I've seen a lot of European countries right-wing winning a lot of ground by blaming the economic decline on the worker class on immigration instead of big corporations. Sadly, it worked and is continuing to work. Yes, and I think like the idea that you can change that dynamic by changing your laws about immigration or changing the way you talk about immigration, I think is just wrong. If that is, and that's maybe a generous, interpretation of what Artie was arguing. I just don't think it happens that way. All right, let's take, 5 more. Parliamentary ricket enthusiasts from my fellow Britons who may want to lord over our American cousins for being uncivilized rubes. Mate, our PM is Boris Johnson. Order, get your own house in order. Sam from Ottawa. Vaush debated 2 race realists last night, and immigration was a big chunk of the debate. Artie needs to give that stream a listen. Robo Gorka. The crisis at the border, or the immigration crisis, has been a right-wing talking point for years. How much are we playing into their fear-mongering by agreeing that there is even a crisis at our southern border? I think there is a crisis for those children, but I don't think that the crisis is one that the country is suffering. Jay Tingle, the Fox News comedy show from 15 years ago, was intended as a dancer to The Daily Show. I watched the beginning of the first episode. Yes, I remember that now. You're right. Oh, that was 15 years ago. Joe, Kansas City, could you discuss Missouri Republicans subverting democracy and ignoring 53% voted on a constitutional amendment to expand Medicaid to 280,000 low-income people? Form of voter suppression overlooked. Yes, we'll talk about that more tomorrow. And the final IM of the day. Chris Burdick. This caller from the UK may be communist, however they define it, but they don't seem to be terribly progressive, and that's putting it nicely. I'm getting a super effing racist vibe from this person, and I'm guessing pro-Brexit as well. This is the kind of affluent immigrant who believes in pulling up the welcome mat behind them. All right, folks. Emma, Matt, Brendan, good job, guys. We will see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth